G'day everyone, my name is Aidan and I am an artist, or at the very least I create things which I refer to as art, and I'm going to be doing a sketch for you on this piece of paper right here for your viewing and entertainment. Now, I'm not doing this with any kind of planning. I've just got an idea in my head of what I want to see, and I'm going to be talking a bit about it as I'm doing the sketch for you. So today what I want to do is a sketch of a character that I really like. My favourite comic book villain is, of course, the Joker, who you can see here in all of his glory. Let's get the camera to focus on that, shall we? There we go. Anyway, I'll be doing a sketch of him and talking a bit about him. So, let's go. I'll be using a dark blue texture, as my black is not very reliable and I want something that's going to work. So let's begin. Now, the very interesting thing about the way the Joker looks is that he's at once very angry looking. He's very evil arched brows, a kind of furrow in the middle there. But he's obviously a very happy character as well, because he's a clown. Which of course brings me to my first point. Why is he a clown? Well, the story goes that a young artist named Bob Kane was employed by DC Comics to create a companion character to their popular Man of Steel, Superman. And after sort of a bit of soul searching, I suppose, he came across the sketch of Da Vinci's Ornithopter, or whatever it's called, can't remember. It's basically a sled with bat wings, and decided that that was what he wanted his superhero to be. So he'd worked that idea around, and a fellow artist who he was working with named Bill Finger told him, no, that looks naff, let's do something a little bit different, and created the version of the Dark Knight detective that we all know and love today. Well, of course, the character took off, didn't he? So they had to create his own comic series, which was aptly named Batman, or specifically Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder, who was introduced in the maiden issue in, I think it was spring of 1940. Anyway, Batman had a number of arch villains that he encountered in his adventures on the Detective Comics line. But for his solo outing, or his original title with Robin, they needed new villains, and one of them was the Joker. Now the Joker, let's move this camera down. There we go. Gives you a bit of a better view. Yes. So the Joker was inspired in part by character called Gwynplaine, as portrayed by Conrad Veidt in a silent film adaptation of The Man Who Laughs. That's where the general clown aesthetic that Bob Kane referred to in his artwork came from. The character of the Joker was actually inspired by a playing card. One of the unfortunate things with Batman history, in particular related to the early creation of these iconic characters, is that Bob Kane basically took credit for every single one of them. Jerry Robinson was an artist who worked on the comic, and he was the one that came up with the idea of having a villain whose calling card was a playing card, and he designed the Joker face that appeared on the card, and that was the start of the character. And Bill Finger helped sort of flesh that out a bit, and we got the first version of the Joker that appeared in comics. Now, he was originally meant to be killed off, and in fact you see him get stabbed to death in his first adventure, only to come back inexplicably at the end, opening up the opportunity to have him in more stories. Fantastic. So over the years he went from being a psychotic murderer who gassed people to death to being a prankster and a bit of a silly character, as we saw portrayed in a lot of the cartoons and by Cesar Romero in the 1960s television series. But it wasn't until the 1970s that we got that really serious, hard-edged Batman back, and of course the villains went back to their kind of Pulp Fiction roots, and the Joker was one of them. He had a story called The Joker's Five-Way Revenge, which introduced this more sinister version of the character who had actually been absent from the comics for a number of years by that point. Anyway, after that he became a staple villain once again, which is great for us because he's a really fascinating character, the complete antithesis of Batman. One of the things I've always liked about him is the fact that here he is, an evil clown character who is supposed to be this kind of fun and frivolous image, as clowns are designed to be, of course. But in fact, he is one of the worst villains ever to come out of Gotham City. You compare this fun and colourful looking character, who is the epitome of evil, with the epitome of all that is good in the city, who is, of course, dressed up as a demon-like Batman, a creature of the night, hides in the shadows and strikes at the hearts of villainy. This dichotomy is quite interesting to sort of look at from an artistic point of view. And it always caught my imagination as far as back as I can remember, and I always loved Jack Nicholson in the role of the Joker in the Tim Burton film. He was kind of one of my first versions of the character, I suppose, that I came across. And he's still probably my favourite. I actually prefer him to Heath Ledger the more I go back and look at the different versions of the character. He kind of feels a lot closer to what the Joker's supposed to be, this vainglorious prankster who has a really sadistic side to him that comes through in his jokes. Now, one of the things that was really interesting as I'm working on the hair, when they were making the Tim Burton Batman film, they wanted to really make the hair look like it did in the comics. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that the hair on the Joker is generally sort of portrayed as being kind of like black with green highlights. And that's because back in the time that the comics were published, they had a limited colour palette that they could use because of the types of inks that they had. And generally speaking, they had to make people with darker colours of hair have black hair with a bit of a highlight colour, which was usually blue if they had black hair, or brown hair even. And because the Joker was meant to represent sort of a clown figure, instead of putting the blue in, they made it green. So he generally is considered to have this really dark green colour in his hair because of that. Well, of course, they ran into a lot of problems trying to get that effect in a realistic setting. But I think, generally speaking, they did really well, and it was quite effective. One of my favourite parts of that character's visual, if you will. Now, I'm begin looking over here, because I've got to get the eyes in. Now, one of the things that I've always liked about the Joker is that he has a very unique colour palette, and for the most part, it comes down to black, white, red, green, and purple. So I'm going to do a little bit of a flash of that. We of course know that he had his ruby red lips, so let's do some of that around here. Now, of course, in the Heath Ledger iteration, the whole clown face thing was something that he added himself to highlight the absurdity of his, I guess, mania. I don't know. It wasn't really made particularly clear why he chose a clown, other than he had a big scarred smile on his face. A lot of subsequent iterations of the Joker in various media plays up the idea that he's wearing makeup, of course, which is not something that I'm particularly fond of. I do like the idea of him with that perma-white skin from a chemical bath. But now, you've got people drawing big, wide grin and really sloppy red face paint, or in the case of Jared Leto's Joker, lipstick. And Heath Ledger's Joker had green hair. Add some green up here, of course. But his was very poorly applied and this kind of weird greenish yellow colour. So it didn't really look particularly green. And lots of his natural blonde colouring came through, of course. And the idea of this really dishevelled, grungy looking Joker didn't make a lot of sense to me. Because the Joker was always someone who was very vain and took a lot of pride in his appearance and showmanship, of course. And he was originally designed to resemble a kind of gaudy 1930s gangster type, as most Batman villains were, of course, which is the reason why I actually didn't have any issues with the way that they portrayed Jared Leto's Joker as being this kind of ultra-tattooed gangbanger type with gaudy clothing and jewellery everywhere. Because if the Joker was being created now as an original character, there is a good chance that they would have made him something akin to that based on the gangsters that we have in America these days. So I actually really like that character design, even though aesthetically I'm still sort of, because I prefer the old style. But from a design point of view, I really like it. If I had to choose my favourite Joker, of course, it would be Mark Hamill, because he captures the essence of the character so completely in his vocal performance. I'm not going to burden your ear with an attempt to replicate it. There's a reason why he's paid to do voiceovers and I'm not, of course. There we go, just adding some green there. I reckon that'll do for now. Of course, I've got to put my little signature down the bottom to show that I did it. Let's put it in here. That's just a quick one. Alright, I'm going to give you another look at it here. And there we have it. The Joker.